Hello, everyone. So, over the last few weeks, I've been talking about how race, ethnicity, or just the racial slash ethnic groups in Big Brother US have affected the house guests in their particular group, how they are edited, how they are stereotyped, and how they dealt with overt, covert, micro, or macroaggressions relating to the race or ethnicity. And I realized I haven't covered Big Brother Canada much at all on my channel, and it would be a good idea to talk about how it affected the racial or ethnic minorities in Big Brother Canada. So I'm going to do that now. Like Big Brother US, the largest racial minority group that is cast in Big Brother Canada are Black people. And of course, there are a lot of complaints because Black people aren't the highest minority in US or Canada. It might still be in the US, but it's definitely not in Canada. And I feel like I have to explain this because people tend to lose the plot. I think the reason why they cast more Black people compared to other racial minorities is due to the history of pop culture and media in North America. There were a lot of things like blackface, taking what Black people were doing in their own little media avenues and then putting it into a whiter audience. So the media knows how to stereotype, poke fun of, and use Black people and their art and their culture for entertainment purposes. So when it comes down to reality TV, it's easier for them to stereotype and use Black people as drama fodder compared to other racial or ethnic minorities where they don't have enough experience to use them in the same way they use Black people. So I feel like they're more familiar with casting Black people, and so they can use them for either drama or for racial conflict or for whatever else. It's easier to stereotype them compared to other racial or ethnic minorities. So the fact that there are more Black people than Asian people or Latin people isn't much of a breaking point if you get the historical context behind it. So now we're going to talk about the Black House guests in Big Brother Canada. I might skip some, but I don't think I did from what I've written down. So the first person is Topaz. So she was seen as very aggressive, especially by people like Liza, who continued to slander her and throw microaggressions at Topaz in and out of the game. Though there were several other people who were fighting and arguing throughout the season, but were not seen as aggressive as Topaz was. None of her main allies, especially Peter and Alec, took her seriously as a strategist and a gamer, despite her having very good reads on the house and was better at many elements of the game than they were. This also could be due to her being a girl, which is why they didn't take her very seriously. She was portrayed as a complete fool on the edit and was rarely given any sort of credit, so it seemed like they cast her to be drama fodder and to be a joke, and that's how they edited her. So we're going to move on to Gary. So he was excluded from the majority alliances on both of his seasons, though there's very little reason as to why. In his first season, he had to win some competitions to save himself and for the people in the house to somewhat give him some sort of respect, but then they would eventually call and portray him as aggressive, especially in his argument with Tala, which honestly wasn't a good look. A lot of his treatment and portrayal on the show might have been as a result of his sexuality, but he was also a tall, fit Black man and was the only one in both of his seasons, so it also caused some parallel crossing. But you could also make the argument that him being a gay Black man would have caused him to be edited as more intimidating and aggressive compared to a white gay man. So we're moving on to Paul from Big Brother Canada 2. There was that situation during his nomination in the second week where he accused Andrew of being racist and the entire house blew up on him. He claims that he did it for strategic purposes, but also immediately admitted that Andrew also did make a lot of racially insensitive comments. He was immediately put on the outs, despite being the first HOH, though he did nominate Andrew, the white guy, which might have played a part into things as to why he was put on the outs. He was sent home over Heather, who the house also didn't like, just to do an FU to the Black woman, Ika. So throughout several seasons in Big Brother, House guests, as well as the fans who watch, get more upset when someone is accused of being racist than doing or seeing racist behavior taking place, and this was probably another situation that is akin to that, since people don't want to fix their biases and their wrong behavior, but they only care about the appearance of racism, if that makes sense. So now we are going to move on to Aika. She was portrayed as a mean girl on the show due to her antics, but was painted as the main and sole mean girl who was bullying Heather when that wasn't the case, and most of the other girls were partaking in it as well. There were a bunch of microaggressions thrown at her, especially by Kenny and Andrew, and they called her a bunch of curse words while she shredded the letters and even said microaggressions before this incident happened. No one stood up for her, and they would never go after a non-black woman in the same way that they went after her. During her argument with Neda in Big Brother Canada 5, Neda decided to mock the way and tone she spoke, which was a clear microaggression, so it seemed like she was trying to do the snapping fingers ghetto talk action, which wasn't cool at all. Jackie would also always make fun of Aika's hair and mention that Jackie's hair, was real, which is something black women always go through, though, as we know, many non-black women also wear extensions, but it's never made into a big deal or seen as controversial or used as an attack point. Dre also made comments about not wanting to be, quote-unquote, that type of black person, in reference to Aika and what she represents. So clearly she was pretty much stating that she didn't want to be ghetto like Aika, which is a problem. And this tends to happen a lot more on Big Brother Canada than it does on Big Brother US, which is actually very interesting, since Canada is also supposed to be the more racially exclusive, racially better, racially educated country compared to the United States. So the next person on the list is Brittnee from Big Brother Canada 3. Her experience reminds me a lot of Kalia's experience in Big Brother 13, where absolutely no one took her seriously, though a part of that may have been due to their body shapes as well as them being black women who were close allies with a white woman. Despite winning most of the competitions out of her duo throughout the season, and actually being the person who convinced Bobby to vote out Jordan, something Sarah couldn't do, all the credit of her game was given towards Sarah throughout the entire season by everyone in the house and even some of the online fanbase. I also remember that her and Ashley had this really weird feud the entire season that made no sense. I don't know if there's a jealousy thing because they're both pretty women and people always have a big deal with the pretty black women. I don't want to accuse Ashley of that, but I don't know if there was something else along with it. So instead of being seen as the ghetto aggressive black girl, she was seen as the black girl who was not taken seriously and no one should worry about. Pretty much. So the next person from the same season is Godfrey. He was essentially asleep for the first few weeks of the season, though I think some people did think he was aggressive, especially with some confrontation that happened with Sydney in the first or second week. But no one thought it was a good idea to include him into an alliance, and it wasn't until Bruno, who was one of the only people who realized that he was a good number, brought him into something. Of course, he played a great floater game throughout the season and improved his social and strategic game tremendously, but it was ignored. It's interesting that someone like Kevin from Big Brother Canada 10 and other white players in Big Brother history can play the same game and win, but as we will see in this video, that's never the case for black men who play the same game. So it's like they either have to be upfront and aggressive or they're not going to be given the win at all. So we're moving on to Big Brother Canada 4 and it's time to discuss Sharry. There really isn't much to discuss here, but she was immediately grouped with Loveita, but that didn't really matter much, and she didn't get anywhere the same amount of hatred, though I think that happened because they didn't see her as an aggressive black woman, and because she was more passive, she was sent home second, so there really wasn't much time for there to be any discussion involving her in this element. Now it is time to talk about Loveita from the same season. The house immediately felt comfortable throwing a bunch of microaggressions at her, would call her all types of curse words, and spoke with so much hatred and venom, when Loveita never got personal with anyone in the house. Her big flaw was that she was a huge game bot, not that she treated people horribly. No one thought to really include her in a legit alliance, even the people who should have included her, like Maddie, Ramses, and Dallas. And she was expendable to everyone in the house, to the point where Maddie nominated and evicted her on her HOH for seemingly no reason. It was really disturbing seeing how everyone would treat her, and they also made fun of her hair, which got ruined in the first HOH competition that had a lot of water, so she would have to wear a hat the entire time to cover her extensions and weave, but the Houseguests still made fun of that as well. So we're going to move on to Dre from Big Brother Canada 5. And the main thing that stands out to me about her is that she mentioned that she doesn't want to be, like, quote unquote, that type of black girl that Ika represents, which is pretty much insinuating that Ika was ghetto and she would not be friends with her outside of the house. This dichotomy happens with black people in general, especially when there's a group of them, and some of them don't want to be, quote unquote, that type of black person, and she clearly wanted to be the, quote unquote, good black girl, who was well behaved, timid, and makes white people feel comfortable. So that was clearly what she was trying to do in the house. And I think her speaking French was one of the elements that played into that, for her at least. So we are going to talk about Andrew from Big Brother Canada 6. He was immediately put on the outs in this game, and his own ally Ryan thought he was too much of a liability to keep around, though it wasn't a good move for him to do, which the entire house agreed upon. They made him seem like he was scary and intimidating, though he never really rose his voice at anyone. It was easy for Ryan to sacrifice the black man in the house so he could fit in with the non-black people, essentially. That's how I took it. Andrew has made it known post-season throughout videos and podcasts how uncomfortable he was in the house and how he felt like race played a part in his downfall on the season. So, we are going to move on to Merron from the same season. In the house, he was very quiet and didn't fall into a common black archetype, quote unquote, so he was relatively under-edited. He was brought into the house later on than everyone else because he was portrayed as an angel. That's how they marketed him, since they were marketing them based off of being an angel or a devil. He has stated postseason that he didn't feel comfortable with interacting with his majority white cast and was relieved to go home because he felt restricted. So we're going to move a season and talk about Kailyn. I actually wrote in my notes that I didn't have anything to discuss, but that is wrong. I think it was easier for her to be booted early due to her age, mainly anything else, but especially in Big Brother Canada and even in US, there have been many cases where older white women make it far into the game, but I don't recall an older black woman ever lasting long in US or Canada. So I think her age, in addition to her race, made it harder for her to fit in with the others in the cast and made it easy for her to be an early boot. So from the same season as Anthony. So he lost the game while playing a very similar game to Godfrey, who also lost, though Kevin in BB Can 10 won, playing very similarly to the both of them. Seeing his and Godfrey's loss, as well as Daniel Reyes' loss to Lisa Donahue, Sarah Hanlon, and Dane, who are all white, could indicate that a black person needs to not be beside a white person in order to win, and that they need to be beside a black person in order to win, which we see with Tychon, which we see with Taylor, which we see with Xavier, and even Tamar from Celebrity Big Brother. Black men do not get the same respect playing a quieter, less competitive, but a more social strategic game. He has said that he would intentionally sit under people and would sit on the floor and avoid couches and HOH beds when he would talk to people, so he would not be seen as aggressive, especially since he's a taller, more muscular man, and he knows that he comes off as, or would immediately look as aggressive, even compared to Adam and Dane, who are his allies. So it was great that he had that self reflection immediately and went out of his way to make the non black people feel comfortable by putting himself in positions that make him smaller and lower. So we're going to move on to Jamar from Big Brother Canada 8. And it's crazy, this is the shortest Big Brother Canada season ever, and this one might be the longest topic of discussion. So, do I even seriously need to get into this? People would make fun of how Jamar spoke, especially Kyle and his allies, though he was just a normal young black man who had an excitable and big personality who liked having fun. Sheldon would mention that he didn't want to be quote unquote that type of black person in reference to Jamar, insinuating that he was ghetto, uneducated, and violent. So, throughout the season, Kyle wanted Jamar to act like a quote unquote black clown or a black C beep beep N, if you know what I mean, essentially for his own white amusement, and Jamar refused to do it. Kyle got pissed off at this, and it would lead to the argument that would cause Jamar to be expelled, and the blonde woman, who I don't remember her name, as well as Kyle, would act like they were so threatened when Jamar made gun motions. So, outside of many people in the house, including black people, painting him and pushing him to be this aggressive stereotype, production also dropped the ball on the entire situation, since they expelled him over something that was so small and something that could have been resolved with production either talking to the house guests or having them talk it out with one another. And then, once the backlash started, they expelled Kyle as a backlash, showing a lot of his aggressive antics and racist antics. They just really dropped the ball on this entire situation. And it just shows, even in Canada, though this happens in US a lot, people will push you so you can be that stereotype that they want to group you into anyways, which just isn't fair. And production and the network unfortunately leaned into this a lot more. This would be the season before they promote Arissa to be an executive producer, where they would try to make things more equal racially and ethnically. So we have Sheldon from the same season who would enable Kyle's racist antics for strategy and even for his own immediate humor. Since Kyle was an ally of his and he didn't even like Jamar, who was still loyal to Sheldon the entire time. Like Dre, he pulled a quote unquote not like one of those blacks in reference to Jamar, who was loyal to him and would continuously accuse him of being violent, aggressive, and ghetto, and would state that Jamar deserved the way he was being treated by some of the white house guests. So Angie is from the same season as Sheldon and Jamar, and in my notes I wrote that there was nothing notable in the short month that she was in the house, but I'm starting to renege on that. She is akin to Topaz and some of the other black women I've discussed, either in this video or the Big Brother US video, where they're in the quote unquote not to be taken seriously type of black woman, where they're pretty ignored by the house guests and aren't really respected either, and aren't given the great edits because they aren't taken seriously by anyone. Now we are moving on to Big Brother Canada 9, and this was after the civil rights movement that happened in 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement that really increased during that year, where Arissa was promoted to being an executive producer and they started casting a lot more people of color. But as we would see throughout this season and the next season, they mainly just casted more black people. So we're going to talk about Latoya first. So the entire house was jealous because she was close with the black men of the house, Jedson and Tychon, and they unjustly saw her as some sort of mastermind, mainly due to what happened in the Julie boot. As we have seen in many Big Brother seasons, everyone is so intimidated when black people get along, or even just people of color in general get along, and are seen as the scariest and most intimidating group of people in the entire house, and she unfortunately fell victim to that. So, a lighter skinned black woman was insecure about the connection Latoya had with the two black men of the house. Actually, no, two of the three black men of the house. and essentially wanted that position for herself. So she took Latoya out and got really personal and created this one-sided feud, despite Latoya not doing anything to her. There's arguably some colorist elements into the situation that happened. So I might as well just move on to Victoria next, but she was next on the list anyways. But it was a nice transition. So, like I just said, she had a very personal, one sided conflict with the dark skinned black woman, Latoya, because she was close to two of the black men in the house and used her HOH to take her out. And there was really no gameplay reasons for this, and it just seemed like it was mainly due to personal reasons. Like I said earlier, there were some colorist elements that could be seen depending on the viewer. She was also seen as the aggressive one after Latoya left and was very unpredictable due to her gameplay, which only made people wary of her, even people she was supposed to be aligned with. During her argument with Tara, she came off as aggressive, especially in her final week with how she campaigned, and she was just seen as this ridiculous wild card. I remember even Beth throwing some microaggressions against Victoria as well as Latoya throughout the season, since she was jealous of the both of them as well. So we're going to move on to Jedson, and he fell under the extremely sexualized person of color trope that happens with quite a few of them, not only in Canada but in US, which I think I discussed with some of them. So he is biracial and he grew up in a predominantly white area, so he didn't know much about black history or black culture. So that was something he had to learn and deal with in the house. So, of course, he was paired up with Tychon from the very beginning of the season, and there was this awkward love triangle that happened with Beth throughout the season, which didn't portray them very well. Of course, there was people portraying him as very scary and intimidating, despite him not having the personality that would fit any of those descriptions, and it seemed like he was dealing with the fact that people saw him as black and treated him like how black people are normally treated in real life. It seemed like he was very sheltered with certain elements that came with black people and the black experience, so he kind of had to learn and deal with that throughout his time in the house. So the next person is Breydon, and I don't have a lot to say about him. From what I could remember, him being biracial did not play a part into how he identified in the house or his experience in the house. Though it's interesting comparing him to Gary, since they are both gay black men who are tall and relatively fit, but because there were two other black men in Breydon's season compared to Gary, where he was the only one, Gary was treated as aggressive and intimidating amongst his cast, while Breydon was seen as non threatening and passive within his cast. And now we're going to move on to Tychon. So he was seen as being part of a scary duo with Jedson and an even scarier trio with Latoya, which was immediately targeted because no one likes it when black people or people of color in general get along. So Latoya was moved, even by people who were supposed to be their allies like Beth throwing shade at the entire situation. And then he got into a showmance with Beth before she hooked up with Jedson, and then there was that triangle situation that did bring some tension, and she would awkwardly sexualize both him and Jedson, which would make them uncomfortable at times. So he also played into the quote unquote sexualized POC role that some of the men deal with in Big Brother. So now we are going to move on to Big Brother Canada 10, and there are even more black people on this season, though quite a few of them are mixed or mainly identify with another. But like I said in my BBUS videos, if they are mixed with two minority groups, I'm going to put them under both. So we're going to talk about Jay. He identified a lot more with his indigenous side than his black side in the house, and I think that was mainly due to indigenous people being extremely underrepresented in media in general. There was a situation that didn't make it onto the show with Kyle, where he accused Kyle of making some racist remark, and they argue about it before the feeds are cut. It ended up being false, but maybe he saw a hint was what was about to come with Kyle and some of the gameplay Kyle would use in the succeeding weeks. So the next person on the list from the same season is Tynesha. So she was compared to Tiffany from Big Brother 23 a lot, just because they are black women who are mothers, and people made her out to be a much scarier and a much more intimidating player than she was, solely because of this perception and because Big Brother 23 happened right before the season. This would happen sometimes where either the last Canadian season or the last American season would happen, and that would cause a lot of perceptions to be placed on someone in the current Big Brother Canada season that was happening. She was also partially targeted and evicted because people like Kyle and some of the other white people in the house assumed that there was some people of color alliance that was in the season that didn't exist. It's very interesting how this was the case with both 2022 Big Brother seasons that happened. So, the next person we are going to discuss is Hermon. So, he was grouped in with a bunch of the other people of color in the house under some mythical alliance that did not exist. But this was interesting because he was targeting Moose to the entire house for most of the season, and he continuously threw Summer and Tanisha under the bus several times since he didn't trust either one of them. In the house, he was seen as the big, scary, intimidating black player who was the main threat that needed to go, but he saved himself a few times. So we're going to move on to Summer. She, as well as the others, were grouped into this nonsensical POC alliance that was supposedly in the house, mainly due to the cookout happening in the past season, and people not understanding that a black alliance doesn't mean that there's going to be a POC alliance in another season. Another situation that stood out to me pertaining her experience in the Big Brother house was that Marty felt comfortable with yelling at her and banging his hands and slamming his hands on the table very aggressively in front of her about a situation that really had nothing to do with her. But he would never speak to anyone else in the house in this manner. So the fact that he felt like he could treat a black woman like this just really rubbed me the wrong way. And Marty had a lot of awkward moments in the house, especially with the way he would treat people of color, but this would be the worst experience of his. But Summer handled it very well. So we're going to move on to Betty from the same season. And there really isn't much that is notable. She was very emotional and very petty, but there wasn't much attached to her ethnicity or race pertaining her personality and edit, especially compared to the other black people on the season, though she was grouped in with that POC alliance as well. It seemed like she was grouped in with the quote unquote do not take seriously type of black person that they cast, especially black women, and she was the quote unquote joke black woman of the cast, mainly with how she was edited and treated by the other house guests. And last but not least is the runner up, Josh. So he identified a lot more with his indigenous side than his black side. So he talked a lot about indigenous representation throughout the season. And like Jay, I think it's mainly due to indigenous people being very underrepresented in the media. So he wanted to push that side of him more. So when Kyle went off about his cookout slash POC 2.0 alliance, he was put up as the replacement nominee to be sent home, but luckily that didn't happen. So as the season went on, he aligned with Helena and Kevin, an Indian woman and a white man, and a lot of the black and POC people in the house thought that he was closer to them than he really was. So as they kept on being sent to jury, they got a lot angrier with him, and in so many ways, they kind of saw him as a sellout, especially since he did prioritize Kevin over everyone else. So that is my rundown of the Black House guests in Big Brother Canada history and some of their treatment, whether it was by production or with their other house guests. It is interesting that Canada is seen as so much better than US, but they have a lot of the same problems, especially with the editing they use, how production treats some of the house guests, and the treatment among the other house guests. Despite that, I do think that they do try more than the American show to have better black representation and to have more of them as well. though you really see that change within the last 2 seasons. But it doesn't mean that they should ignore other racial or ethnic minority groups as well, which tends to happen, especially in Big Brother Canada 9, where in the finale they talked about black representation and there's this huge segment, but they ignored the other people of color. I don't know if this was mainly due to the Black House guests talking about their racial journeys and their ethnicity and race more, or the Black alumni fighting for equality more than other racial or ethnic groups, but either way, they need to put this effort into all of the minority groups. So, the next video I'm going to make is on Middle Eastern and North African house guests in Big Brother Canada history, and there's enough of them to make their own video, which I unfortunately couldn't do for Big Brother US, so I'm looking forward to that. I'll be back with something soon. Take care.